They say a smile can hide 1,000 sorrows. On Christmas Eve 1854, I proved it could hide something far more dangerous. A plan to burn an empire to ashes while its kings slept in their beds. My name is Ruth. I am 38 years old. I have served the Caldwell family of Natchez, Mississippi for 23 years. And tonight, as I pour their wine and arrange their silver, as I listen to their laughter echoing through this grand dining room, I am counting down the hours until I take everything they love and turn it to smoke. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where all great fires begin, with a single spark of injustice so hard it can ignite a soul. It was 3 weeks ago, November 28th, when they burned my husband alive, Samuel. My Samuel. 39 years old, tall and strong, with hands that could mend anything broken except the system that owned us both. They accused him of stealing a silver pocket watch, a watch that Master Caldwell's own son had lost in a drunken stupor down by the river. Samuel never touched it. He couldn't have. He was with me that entire evening, mending the fence behind the quarters. I remember because we talked about winter coming, about how the wind would find every gap in our cabin walls, about how we'd need to stuff the cracks with moss and mud again. Simple talk, survival talk, the kind of conversation that fills the spaces between heartbeats when you're trying to find small joys in a life that offers none. But facts don't matter when you're property. Truth is whatever your master says it is. And Master Caldwell said Samuel was a thief. More than that, he said Samuel needed to be made an example, needed to be punished in a way that would be remembered, needed to burn. They tied him to the old oak tree in the center of the plantation, the same tree where they'd hanged 2 men the year before for trying to escape. That tree had become a monument to terror, its branches twisted from the weight of bodies, its bark stained with blood and fear. But hanging was too merciful for Samuel, Master Caldwell declared. An example had to be made, a lesson had to be taught. Theft could not be tolerated. I was forced to watch. We all were. Every slave on the Caldwell plantation, 147 souls, lined up in rows as the sun set on that cold November evening. The air smelled of woodsome smoke from the quarters and coming frost. Children cried until their mothers hushed them with desperate whispers. Old men stared at the ground, having seen this horror before, knowing exactly what was coming. Young men clenched their fists and felt the weight of chains they couldn't break. Master Caldwell stood on a wooden platform with his entire family. His wife, Evelyn, thin and cold as a winter wind. His 3 brothers, James, Thomas, and William, each one a replica of the same cruelty in different faces. Their wives, silent women who'd learned long ago that mercy was weakness. And his eldest son, Robert, 23 years old and eager to prove himself a man through violence. 8 adults in total, dressed in their finest clothes as if they were attending the opera rather than a murder. The younger children had been kept inside, spared the sight, but not the lesson. They'd hear about it at dinner, learn that this was normal, that this was justice, that this was how you maintained order over people you considered less than human. Master Caldwell's voice carried across the property, strong and clear and completely certain of his righteousness. "Let this be a lesson," he announced. "Theft will not be tolerated. Disobedience will not be tolerated. You are property, and property that steals deserves to be destroyed." He went on for several minutes, turning Samuel's execution into a sermon about discipline and order and the natural hierarchy of the world. He quoted scripture, he quoted law, he made himself the hero of this story, and Samuel the villain. I stood in the 3rd row, held in place by 2 other house slaves who knew I'd run to Samuel if given the chance, not to save him. There was no saving him, but to die with him, to refuse to live in a world this evil. But they held my arms tight and whispered, "Live, Ruth, live. Bear witness. Remember." So I stood and I watched, and I bore witness. And I remembered every single detail of what they did to the man I loved. They doused Samuel in lamp oil first. 3 buckets of it poured over his head and body until he was soaked, until the smell of petroleum overwhelmed everything else. I can still smell it now, all these weeks later. That sick, sweet scent mixing with the autumn air and the smoke from the quarters and the fierce sweat of 147 people being forced to watch murder and call it justice. Samuel looked at me across the crowd. We were maybe 30 feet apart, but it felt like miles. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He didn't give them the satisfaction of his fear. He just looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw everything we'd built together in 15 years of marriage. The stolen moments of joy, the whispered dreams of freedom we'd never see, the quiet morning conversations before dawn when we'd pretend just for a few minutes that we were people instead of property. The nights when we'd held each other and felt, however briefly, that love could exist even here, even in hell, even in chains. And then he mouthed 2 words: live free. Not live. Not goodbye. Not I love you. Live free. Those were his last words to me, shaped by lips that would never kiss me again, spoken without sound because even his voice had been taken from him. Live free. As if freedom was possible, as if I could do anything but survive, as if there was a world beyond this plantation where I could be anything but a runaway slave with a price on my head. But I understood what he meant. He meant, don't let them kill your soul. Don't let them make you into nothing. Don't let them win. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would live, and I would make them pay. Robert Caldwell lit the torch. His father handed it to him personally, making it a family affair, making it a rite of passage, turning murder into tradition. The torch was pine, soaked in pitch, burning bright and hot. Robert held it high for a moment, letting everyone see, making sure the lesson was clear. Then he touched it to Samuel's oil-soaked clothes. The flames caught instantly. They spread so fast, faster than I'd imagined fire could move, racing up Samuel's body like something alive and hungry. His clothes burned first, then his skin. The smell hit a moment later, that horrible smell of burning flesh and hair that I'd never encountered before and would never forget. It was sweet and wrong, and it made my stomach turn, but I couldn't look away because I promised with my eyes that I would watch, that I would bear witness, that Samuel wouldn't die alone. He screamed. God help me, he screamed. I thought he might stay silent, might deny them even that, but pain like that cannot be endured silently. It's not human. So he screamed, and I counted the seconds. 47. 47 seconds of agony before his throat closed or his lungs failed or his brain shut down from the pain. 47 seconds that felt like 47 years. 47 seconds that I will hear in my nightmares until the day I die. After that, there was only the sound of flames and the smell of burning flesh and the sound of the Caldwell family walking back to their house, discussing what they'd have for dinner. They walked away as if they'd just finished a day's work, as if they'd done nothing more significant than prune a tree or brand a cow, as if they hadn't just murdered a man for a crime he didn't commit. They left his body on that tree for 3 days as a warning. 3 days while birds circled and the weather turned colder, and Samuel's remains became something less than human, which I suppose was the point, to show us what we were, what we could be reduced to, how little we mattered. On the 3rd day, they finally cut him down and let me bury what was left in the slave cemetery behind the tobacco barn. There wasn't much to bury, mostly bones and ash. Pieces of the man I'd loved reduced to fragments I could hold in my hands. I placed him in the ground myself, refused any help, needed to do this one last thing for him. I dug the hole with a shovel that had been used to plant cotton and tobacco and all the crops that had made the Caldwells rich. I dug in the hard November earth until my hands bled. I placed what remained of Samuel in that hole and covered him with Mississippi dirt that had drunk the sweat of enslaved people for generations. And as I covered him, as I patted down the earth and marked the spot with a simple wooden cross, something inside me died and something else was born. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot and loud and quick to burn out. This was colder, clearer. This was calculation. This was purpose. This was a decision made in the deepest part of my soul, where no master could reach, where no chain could bind, where I was still myself and capable of choice. They had taken everything from me. Now I would take everything from them, but I wouldn't kill them. No, death was too easy. Death was mercy. Death was what they deserved, which meant it was too good for them. I would do something far worse. I would leave them alive to watch everything they valued turn to ash, just as I had watched Samuel burn. I would strip them of their wealth, their pride, their security, their sense of control. I would make them understand for just one night what it felt like to be powerless, to watch something you love destroyed while you stand helpless. And then I would disappear, and they would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, wondering if I'd come back, wondering if any smile from any slave hid the same cold purpose, wondering if they'd ever be safe again. The Caldwell plantation was one of the wealthiest in Mississippi. 3,000 acres of prime cotton land worked by those 147 slaves. The main house was a testament to wealth extracted from suffering, a massive Greek Revival mansion with white columns and wide verandas filled with furniture shipped from Europe and art bought on trips to New Orleans. 20 rooms of luxury built on foundations of misery. But their wealth wasn't just in cotton, though cotton was king. Master Caldwell had diversified as he liked to brag at dinner parties. He considered himself a modern businessman, not just a planter, but an entrepreneur. And that meant he had 4 pillars holding up his empire, 4 sources of wealth that made him one of the most powerful men in Natchez. First was the cotton warehouse. It sat on the eastern edge of the property, a massive wooden structure 100 feet long and 50 feet wide, packed floor to ceiling with cotton bales wrapped in burlap. He stored not just his own harvest, but cotton from smaller planters who paid him for the privilege. 2 years' worth of cotton waited in that building. $80,000 in raw material waiting for spring prices to rise. At 1854 prices, that was a fortune. Enough to buy a small plantation, enough to purchase 100 slaves, enough to matter. Second was the stable. Master Caldwell loved horses the way some men love whiskey or cards. He'd built a stable 3 years ago that was nicer than most slave quarters in the state. A beautiful structure of pine and oak with a hoft above and a tack room that held saddles worth more than a slave's lifetime of labor. 12 racing horses lived there, each one valuable. But the crown jewel was Thunderstrike, a black stallion that had won $5,000 at the Natchez races last spring. Those horses were his pride, his ticket to social prestige, his conversation piece at parties. Men envied his horses. It gave him status that even money couldn't buy. Third was the tobacco barn. Older than the stable, built 20 years ago from oak that had weathered into silver, it sat near the slave cemetery where Samuel now rested. Inside, hundreds of tobacco leaves hung from racks, drying in carefully controlled airflow. Master Caldwell had learned the art of tobacco curing from a Cuban he'd met in New Orleans, and his tobacco commanded premium prices in Europe. $10,000 of cured leaf hung in that barn, waiting for spring shipment to England and France. And fourth was the bridge. It seemed insignificant compared to the others, just a simple wooden structure spanning Miller's Creek. But it was vital. It was the only way vehicles could access the plantation from the main road. Without it, they were trapped, cut off, isolated, unable to get help or flee or do anything but watch if disaster struck. 4 pillars, 4 sources of wealth and pride and power. And over the next month I would study each one the way a general studies a battlefield, learning every detail, finding every weakness, planning destruction down to the smallest element. I started with the cotton warehouse. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I was sent there with lunch for Marcus and Peter, the 2 slaves responsible for maintaining it. My job was to bring them food, make sure they were working, report back if anything seemed wrong. This gave me access. This gave me opportunity. This gave me knowledge. The building was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Dry cotton, dry wood, poor ventilation, and a roof that leaked just enough to keep everything at the perfect humidity for burning. The front entrance faced the house, a large double door secured at night with a simple iron bolt on the outside. The back had a loading door for wagons also bolted from outside. Those bolts were meant to keep slaves from stealing cotton to sell in town, a concern that showed how little the Caldwells understood or cared about the people they owned, as if we'd risk torture and death for a few pounds of cotton. I memorized every detail. The stacks of cotton bales reached to the ceiling, leaving narrow walking paths between. Oil lamps hung from hooks at regular intervals for the rare night work. Burlap and rope coiled in corners. The wooden floor was stained dark with years of cotton dust and lamp oil. I noticed that the northwest corner, farthest from both doors, had a broken window board that let in just enough air to create a draft. In my mind, I saw it burning. I saw flames starting in that northwest corner, catching the dry cotton, racing through the stacks, feeding on decades of lamp oil soaked into the floor, growing hot enough to make the whole structure collapse inward. I saw those bolted doors keeping the fire trapped inside, letting it grow monstrous before anyone could intervene. I saw $80,000 turning to smoke while the Caldwell family watched from their mansion, helpless. Next, the stables. I knew those horses better than I knew most people. I'd worked in those stables for 5 years before being promoted to housework, mucking stalls and brushing coats and learning to read the moods of animals that lived better than enslaved humans. 12 horses, each one named and pampered and valued. Thunderstrike, the black stallion with a white star on his forehead. Lady Belle, a chestnut mare with a sweet temperament. Duke, Napoleon, Soldier, Princess, Traveler, Storm, Midnight, Ruby, Diamond, and Captain. I knew them all. The stable was newer construction, just 3 years old. built from pine lumber that still wept sap in warm weather. The building was shaped like a long rectangle with stalls on both sides and a wide aisle down the middle. At the far end, a tack room held saddles and bridles and blankets worth thousands. Above everything, a Hoff stored winter feed accessible by a ladder at the rear of the building. Two entrances, the main stable doors at the front facing the house, which were closed and bolted at night, and the rear doors facing the pasture, which were left unbolted for quick evacuation in case of fire. The irony of that detail struck me hard. They had better fire safety plans for horses than for the 147 people who slept in the quarters. Horses could be evacuated quickly. Slaves were expected to save themselves or burn. I studied the hay loft most carefully. Tons of dry hay packed tight, perfect fuel for fire. The loft floor was made of rough-cut boards with gaps between them, so any fire up there would rain embers down into the stalls below. And hay fire burned hot and fast, too fast to stop once it started. In my mind, I saw flames in that loft, spreading through hay bales, dropping burning pieces down into the stable, igniting straw bedding in the stalls, sending panicked horses crashing through the opened rear doors if they had the sense, or dying in their stalls if they didn't. I saw thunder strike, the pride of the Caldwell stable, running wild-eyed into the night. I saw Robert Caldwell, the man who'd lit Samuel's pea, trying desperately to save horses while his father's fortune burned. The tobacco barn required different consideration. It was older, built from oak that had weathered to iron hardness, less vulnerable to fire than the pine stable or the cotton warehouse. But inside, hundreds of tobacco leaves hung drying, each one coated in the natural oils that made Virginia and Mississippi tobacco so valuable to European buyers. Those oils were flammable, not explosive like cotton, but slow-burning and hot, producing thick smoke that would destroy anything it touched. The barn had 3 entrances, a main door facing the dirt road that ran through the plantation, and 2 smaller side doors for air circulation. All 3 had simple wooden latches, no locks. No one worried about slaves stealing tobacco leaves. Where would we sell them? Who would buy from us? Inside, the arrangement was simple. Wooden racks ran the length of the building, each one holding dozens of tobacco leaves hung by their stems to dry. Walking between those racks felt like walking through a forest of brown and gold, the leaves rustling with any movement of air. The smell was rich and earthy, overwhelming if you stayed too long. I had walked those rows many times over the years, helping with harvest, learning which leaves were ready for curing and which needed more time. I knew that once a tobacco fire started, it would burn for hours, the leaves and racks feeding flames slowly but surely, producing smoke so thick it would be visible for miles. In my mind, I saw that barn burning from the inside out, smoke pouring from every gap in the walls, $10,000 of premium tobacco reduced to ash, another piece of Caldwell wealth destroyed, and finally the bridge. The simplest target, but perhaps the most psychologically devastating. It was the plantation's connection to the outside world, the route for cotton wagons and supply deliveries and visitors, and most critically for escape or rescue in an emergency. It spanned Miller's Creek at the property's southern edge, where the road from Natchez entered Caldwell land. The bridge was old, built before I'd arrived at the plantation, constructed from oak timbers and pine planks, 30 feet long, wide enough for a wagon with railings on both sides. It sat about 6 feet above the creek water, which ran shallow most of the year, but became impossible during spring floods. The bridge had 2 support systems, main beams running the length underneath and cross beams connecting them to the deck above. All of it was wood. All of it would burn, and without the bridge, the plantation became an island. Anyone wanting to leave or arrive would have to ford the creek on horseback or on foot. Impossible for wagons, difficult even for riders, especially at night or in bad weather. In my mind, I saw that bridge burning, the center section collapsing into Miller's Creek with a crash and a splash, cutting off the Caldwell family from help, from escape, from any response that might save their property. I saw them trapped in their mansion, watching fires burn all around them, unable to do anything but witness their empire's destruction. 4 targets, 4 pillars of the Caldwell Empire. I would strike all 4 simultaneously at midnight on Christmas, when everyone was asleep, when their bellies were full of holiday meal and rum, when their guard was completely down, when they felt safest and most blessed. But planning destruction is only half the battle. The other half is living with yourself while you smile and serve dinner to people you intend to ruin. December crawled by like a wounded animal, each day stretching longer than the last. Every morning I woke in my small room off the kitchen, a privilege for trusted house slaves, separate from the quarters where most enslaved people slept in crowded cabins. My room was 8 feet by 10 feet, with a narrow bed, a wooden chest for my few belongings, and a window that looked out toward the oak tree where Samuel had died. I woke every morning to that view. I went to sleep every night with that view. It reminded me why I was doing this. Every day I dressed in my gray work dress and white apron, the uniform of a house slave considered trustworthy and civilized. Every day I braided my hair and pinned it up neat and proper. Every day I walked into the big house kitchen and began the endless cycle of cooking and serving and cleaning that defined my existence. And every day I smiled. Mistress Evelyn noticed my improved mood during the second week of December. She was a thin woman with hollow cheeks and cold gray eyes. Known throughout the county for her strict management of house slaves, she believed in discipline and order and the frequent use of punishment for even small infractions. She'd slapped me more times than I could count over the years, usually for imagined offenses like not curtsying fast enough or looking at her directly instead of keeping my eyes down. "Ruth, you're cheerful this morning," she remarked while I served her breakfast. She sat at the small table in the morning room, eating eggs and toast while reading a letter from her sister in Charleston. "Yes, Mom," I replied, pouring her coffee with steady hands. "Christ is coming. It's a blessed time." "Indeed it is," she agreed, sipping delicately. "The celebration of our Lord's birth, the reminder of God's mercy and love. Though I suppose you people can't fully appreciate its spiritual significance, your understanding of Christianity is naturally more primitive." "Yes, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice soft and subservient, every word a lie wrapped in agreement. Inside, I thought about the Christmas gift I would give her family. I thought about how they'd spend every Christmas for the rest of their lives, remembering this one, unable to celebrate without tasting ash. The family was planning a large Christmas gathering, their annual tradition. Master Caldwell's 3 brothers would arrive with their families, filling the house with noise and wealth and careless joy. 8 adults total: Master Caldwell and Mistress Evelyn, James Caldwell and his wife Margaret, Thomas Caldwell and his wife Sarah, William Caldwell and his wife Catherine, plus 15 children ranging from age 4 to 17, the next generation of slaveholders learning how to wield power over human beings. 23 people who would go to bed Christmas night in a world of wealth and wake up in ruins. Preparations consumed the household through December. Mistress Evelyn wanted everything perfect. The silver had to be polished until it gleamed. The floors had to be scrubbed and waxed. Every window had to sparkle. The guest rooms had to be prepared with fresh linens and flowers. The menu had to be planned and ingredients ordered from town. I threw myself into the preparations with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. "Ruth has really embraced the Christmas spirit," I heard Mistress Evelyn tell her husband one evening. "Perhaps Samuel's death taught her proper humility." Master Caldwell nodded approvingly. "Discipline and consequences, my dear. They're the foundation of a well-run plantation." I continued polishing silver and smiled. On December 15th, I made my first preparation for the fires. I requested permission to purchase kerosene for the house lamps, a normal task for the head house slave. Mistress Evelyn approved without question. I took the wagon to town with old Jessie, who drove for the family and purchased 2 large jars of kerosene from the general store. I also bought extra lamp wicks, candles, and other household supplies that provided cover for my real purpose. On the way back to the plantation, I hid 1 jar of kerosene behind the tobacco barn, wrapped in burlap and tucked under a loose board where no one would find it. The other jar I brought into the house and stored in the usual place. No one questioned it. No one suspected. I was Ruth, the trusted house slave, the broken widow, the obedient servant. On December 18th, I made my second preparation. I asked permission to visit Samuel's grave to mark the 3-week anniversary of his death with prayer. Mistress Evelyn, feeling generous in the Christmas season, agreed. She even gave me a small prayer book to take with me, a gesture she probably thought was charitable. I walked to the slave cemetery behind the tobacco barn, moving slowly like a grieving widow should. But once I was out of sight of the main house, I collected my hidden kerosene jar and scouted the tobacco barn carefully. I noted which side door had the loosest latch, which corner of the building was most hidden from view, where I could start a fire that would spread unnoticed until it was too big to stop. Then I visited Samuel's grave. I knelt in the dirt and I talked to him, told him what I was planning, asked for his forgiveness if I was wrong, asked for his strength if I was right. The wooden cross I'd made for him stood crooked in the earth, already weathering from rain and cold. I straightened it and promised him that his death would mean something. that the Caldwells would pay, that justice, even incomplete and imperfect, would come. On December 21st, I made my third preparation. I volunteered to take lunch to Marcus and Peter at the cotton warehouse, something I'd done many times before. While they ate, I explored the warehouse thoroughly, noting the placement of oil lamps, the narrow gaps between cotton stacks, the broken window board in the northwest corner that created a draft. I also loosened the bolts on both doors, working the metal back and forth until the threads were worn enough that the bolts would close, but could be worked free with effort from inside if someone were trapped. I wasn't a monster. If someone ended up in the warehouse when fire struck, I wanted them to have a chance to escape. But from the outside, those bolts would look securely fastened. On December 23rd, I made my final preparation. I walked the plantation grounds in the afternoon, carrying a basket of mending as if I were looking for good light to work by. In reality, I was planning my route for Christmas Eve, from the kitchen door to the bridge, from the bridge to the tobacco barn, from the tobacco barn to the stables, from the stables to the cotton warehouse, from the warehouse into the swamp and away. I timed each segment, walking at night speed, checking sight lines from the main house, identifying places to hide if someone spotted me. The entire route would take about 45 minutes if I moved efficiently. 45 minutes to change my life forever. 45 minutes to burn down an empire. Christmas Eve arrived with cold, clear weather. The temperature dropped below freezing overnight, leaving frost on the grass that sparkled in the morning sun. Perfect fire weather. No rain to dampen anything. Wind from the west that would push flames away from the main house and toward the property edges where my targets waited. The family began arriving at noon. Carriages rolled up the long drive, horses' breath steaming in winter air, wheels crunching on the oyster shell road that led from the gate to the house. Children spilled out shouting, already playing before their feet touched ground, running across the frost-dead lawn with the carelessness of people who'd never known suffering. The adults moved more slowly, weighed down by heavy coats and heavier pride. Master James Caldwell arrived first with his wife Margaret and their 4 children. James was the eldest brother, 50 years old, even wealthier than his siblings, owning a plantation twice the size of this one up in Warren County. Margaret was a tiny woman who said little, but watched everything with sharp eyes. Master Thomas arrived next with his wife Sarah and their 5 children. Thomas was 48, the most religious of the brothers, known for forcing his slaves to attend Sunday services where he preached about obedience and the curse of Ham. Sarah was a faded beauty who drank sherry in secret and grew meaner with each glass. Master William came last with his wife Catherine and their 6 children. William was 45, the youngest brother, the one who laughed loudest and drank hardest and enjoyed the whip more than any of them. Catherine pretended not to notice her husband's cruelty, lost in a world of novels and laudanum. 23 people, 8 adults who upheld slavery through action or silent consent. 15 children being raised to do the same. Not one of them would die tonight, but all of them would remember this Christmas for the rest of their lives. I greeted each family at the door, taking coats, directing children to the parlor, where gifts waited under a massive pine tree cut from the property's north woods. My hands were steady, my smile was perfect. Inside, I was counting hours. 8 hours until midnight. 8 hours until justice. 8 hours until I became someone new. The afternoon passed in a blur of service. I helped prepare tea and cookies for the children. I carried luggage to guest rooms. I made sure the guest bathrooms had fresh towels and soap. I smiled and curtsied and said, "Yes, Mom, and no, sir," and played the role I'd perfected over 23 years. At 6 o'clock, we served Christmas Eve dinner. The dining room table had been expanded to its full length, seating all 23 people. Crystal glasses caught candlelight from the chandelier above. Silver gleamed, white tablecloth, white china, white napkins, a portrait of prosperity and Christmas cheer, and everything that was good and right in their world. The menu was elaborate. I'd spent 2 days preparing it with Martha and Bueller, the other house slaves. Roasted goose with orange glaze, honey-glazed ham, sweet potatoes with brown sugar and pecans, collarded greens cooked with bacon, cornbread made with buttermilk, cranberry sauce, pickled vegetables, 3 types of pie, pecan, sweet potato, and apple. Everything perfect, everything beautiful, everything hiding the truth that the woman serving them was counting down to their destruction. I served each course with impeccable grace. I filled wine glasses. I carried platters from the kitchen. I carved the goose at tableside, a skill Mistress Evelyn had taught me years ago. I answered questions with yes, sir, and no, Mom, and I watched Master James brag about his cotton yields, 800 bales this year, best crop in Warren County. I watched Master Thomas lead a prayer before the meal, thanking God for his blessings and asking for continued prosperity. I watched Master William drink too much wine and grow loud and inappropriate, joking about a slave woman he'd sold last month for resisting his advances. I watched Mistress Evelyn correct her youngest son's table manners with a sharp pinch to his arm under the table. I watched Robert Caldwell, the man who'd lit Samuel's funeral pea, flirt with his cousin Charlotte across the table, both of them young and beautiful and completely untouched by guilt. I watched 15 children laugh and play and fight and eat, innocent of their parents' sins but being trained daily to continue them. I watched them and felt a moment of doubt. They were children. They hadn't chosen this system. They'd been born into it, just like I'd been born into slavery. But then I remembered that Robert Caldwell had once been a child too, that Master Caldwell and his brothers had once been innocent, that every slaveholder started as a child who learned cruelty from parents who thought it was normal. And I remembered that these children would grow up to own people, to whip people, to sell people, to burn people alive for imagined crimes, unless something changed, unless someone showed them that actions had consequences, unless someone taught them that slaves were human beings who could strike back. So I hardened my heart and continued serving dinner and counting down to midnight. "Ruth," Master Caldwell called during the main course, his voice jovial with wine and holiday spirit. "You seem happy tonight. That's good to see. You've been through a difficult time." The table quieted slightly, everyone looking at me with mild curiosity, the way you might look at a dog that had learned a new trick. I set down the wine decanter and folded my hands, a posture of humility and respect. "Yes, sir, I'm very happy. This will be a Christmas none of us will ever forget." He laughed, delighted. "That's the spirit. See, everyone, even in grief, the spirit of Christmas can restore. This is what good Christian influence does. This is what proper discipline and care can accomplish. We take care of our people, and they respond with loyalty." The table murmured agreement and returned to their meal. Master Thomas nodded piously. Master James raised his wineglass in salute to his brother's wisdom. Master William laughed too loud and made a crude joke about slave loyalty that made the women blush and the men chuckle. If they'd looked closer, they might have seen that my smile didn't reach my eyes. They might have noticed that my hands, clasped in humility, were too steady for someone supposedly filled with emotion. They might have wondered why I kept glancing at the grandfather clock in the corner. They might have sensed the cold purpose radiating from me like winter air, but they didn't look closer. They never did. We were furniture to them, useful, obedient furniture that smiled and served and suffered in silence. They couldn't imagine that furniture might think, might plan, might hate them with a cold clarity that made my earlier grief seem mild. 7 hours until midnight. After dinner, the family moved to the parlor for gift exchange and carol singing. Their voices drifted through the house. "Silent night, O come, all ye faithful, joy to the world. Hark the herald angels sing, hymns about peace and mercy and God's love, hymns sung by people who'd watched a man burn alive 3 weeks ago and felt nothing but satisfaction." I stood in the kitchen washing dishes and hummed along, joy to the world indeed. At 10 o'clock, the children were put to bed in various rooms throughout the second floor of the house. At 11, the adults finally retired, full of food and rum and Christmas spirit. The house grew quiet, except for the settling sounds of old wood in cold weather and the grandfather clock's steady tick. Midnight approached. I waited in my small room off the kitchen, dressed in dark clothes I'd prepared for this night. I'd already packed a bundle. 1 change of clothes, food stolen over weeks, a kitchen knife, matches, and the small jar of kerosene I'd brought into the house. I'd hidden a second jar behind the tobacco barn earlier. Everything was ready. At 1:15 I slipped out through the kitchen door. The night was cold and moonlit. Enough light to see by, not enough to be clearly seen. My breath made small clouds. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The plantation slept, unaware that its world was about to end. I moved like a ghost toward the bridge first. It was farthest away, and I needed to cut off their escape route before anything else. My feet knew the path, even in darkness. Years of walking these grounds had made them familiar as my own skin. The grass crunched under my shoes. Frost stiffened and brittle. The bridge loomed ahead, a dark shape spanning Miller's Creek. The water below moved slowly, black and silver in the moonlight. I crossed to the center and pulled out my kerosene jar and matches. My hands were steady. My breath was steady. My heart beat slow and calm. I felt no rage. I felt no doubt. I felt nothing but purpose. I doused the center support beams, the railings, the planks themselves. The smell was sharp in the cold air. That same petroleum scent they'd poured on Samuel. Appropriate, poetic, justice. Then I struck a match. The tiny flame seemed impossibly bright in the darkness, a star held between my fingers. For just a moment I hesitated. This was the point of no return. Light this fire and I became something new, something dangerous, something they would hunt until they caught me or I died. I thought of Samuel's eyes in those last moments. Live free. I dropped the match. The fire caught slowly at first, licking at kerosene-soaked wood, testing its fuel. Then it grew bolder, spreading along the railings, dropping down to the support beams, climbing higher. Within seconds, flames ran the length of the bridge's center section. The wood was old and dry and hungry for fire. It burned eagerly, crackling loud in the cold silence. I didn't wait to watch. I had 3 more stops in limited time. I ran toward the tobacco barn, my second target, my feet carrying me along paths I'd memorized. The slave cemetery appeared first, Samuel's grave a dark shape in the moonlight. I paused there for just a moment. Watch this, my love. Watch me burn down their empire. Watch me give you justice. Then I retrieved my hidden kerosene jar and entered the tobacco barn through the side door with the loose latch. Inside, darkness was absolute. The hanging tobacco leaves rustled in the draft from the open door, whispering secrets in the dark. I stood still, letting my eyes adjust, letting the building's geography remind me where everything was. Then I moved between the rows, trailing kerosene over leaves and racks and floor. The tobacco soaked it up, drinking the fuel, preparing to burn hot and long. I worked quickly but thoroughly, making sure every section had fire to feed on. At the door, I made a final trail of kerosene leading outside. I struck another match, dropped it on the trail. The fire raced inside like something alive, eager to devour. Within moments, the first tobacco leaves caught. Flames climbed the racks. Smoke billowed thick and black. The barn filled with fire so fast it seemed magical, as if the building had been waiting years for this moment. I closed the door behind me and moved toward the stables, my third target. By now, the bridge fire was visible from the main house, a growing orange glow at the property's edge. I had maybe 2 minutes before someone woke and noticed. I had to move faster. The stable smelled of hay and horse and leather, familiar scents from my ears working there. 12 animals stirred in their stalls, sensing something wrong. They nickered and stamped, nervous, but not yet panicked. I moved to the rear doors first and threw them wide open, creating an escape route to the pasture. Then I climbed the ladder to the hoft. I'd agonized over this more than anything else in my planning. The horses, they were innocent. They hadn't burned Samuel. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were just animals caught in the crossfire of human cruelty. But they were also the most valuable, most beloved part of Master Caldwell's empire. His pride, his status, his entry into the world of racing and gentleman planters. Without them, he lost more than money. He lost prestige. In the end, I decided, give them a way out, but burn it anyway. Open the doors, let them run if they could, but destroy the stable and everything in it. Let God or luck or their own instincts decide if they survived. It was more mercy than the Caldwells had ever shown to anyone. I poured kerosene over hay bales, over the loft floor, over the rafters. The fumes made my eyes water. My hands worked fast, emptying the jar completely. Then I climbed back down the ladder, struck a match, and threw it up into the loft. The hay exploded into flame with a whooshing sound that scared even me. The fire spread so fast through the loft that I barely had time to run to the stalls. I threw open every door, slapped every horse's rump, shouted at them to run. Go! Get out! Save yourselves! Most ran for the open rear doors. Their instincts sound even in panic. Thunderstrike, the prize stallion, reared and screamed, but finally bolted, his black coat shining in firelight as he disappeared into the night. Lady Belle and Duke followed Napoleon and Soldier, Princess and Traveler. But Storm and Midnight ran the wrong direction toward the main stable doors, confused by smoke and fear. Ruby froze in her stall. Diamond and Captain crashed into each other, trying to exit, creating a tangle of legs and panic. I couldn't help them anymore. I'd given them a chance. That was more than the Caldwells had given Samuel. I ran from the burning stable toward my final target, the cotton warehouse, the crown jewel of Caldwell wealth. Behind me, I heard the first shouts from the main house. Someone had seen the fires. Multiple voices now, confused and panicked. Who's there? Fire. Dear God, fire everywhere. Get water. Get the slaves. Ring the bell. The plantation bell began ringing, the alarm that summoned everyone to emergencies. But it was too late. My fires were already too big, too many, too well planned to stop. The cotton warehouse loomed ahead, massive in the firelight from other burning buildings. This would be the final blow. $80,000 in cotton. 2 years of harvest, the foundation of everything. I ran to the back loading door first, pulled the outside bolt closed, and jammed it with a piece of wood I'd hidden earlier. The bolt looked secure, but could be forced from inside if someone were trapped. Then I circled to the front entrance. More shouting from the house now, closer, figures running in nightclo. I had seconds. I poured the last of my kerosene around the front entrance, dousing the door itself, soaking the frame. My hands shook now finally from exhaustion and adrenaline and the magnitude of what I'd done. I struck my last match with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy. The door was old pine, dry as bone, soaked in kerosene. It caught immediately, flames racing up and across like a living thing climbing toward sky. I heard the fire finding gaps creeping inside toward mountains of cotton that would burn for days, producing heat so intense it would melt metal and turn wood to vapor. Someone's by the warehouse. A shout from near the house. Male voice. Robert Caldwell maybe, or one of his uncles. They'd seen me. Time to go. But first, one last message. I ran toward the house where the family was pouring out in nightclothes and robes, confused and panicked and completely unprepared for what was happening. They were running toward the fires, not looking behind them, trying to understand how everything could be burning at once. I slipped around to the front entrance of their precious home, the only building I'd deliberately spared, and pulled out a piece of charcoal I'd saved from the kitchen stove. On the white-painted front door, I wrote in large letters, "Merry Christmas. You burned one man, I burned one empire. Justice Ruth." Then I ran for my life. I ran toward the slave quarters, but not to hide there. That would be the first place they'd search once they realized what happened. Instead, I ran past them, toward the woods beyond, toward the swamp on the north edge of the property that most people avoided. The same swamp where I'd been born before being sold to the Caldwells at age 15. I knew every path, every dry spot, every place to hide. Behind me, the night turned orange and red and gold. 4 fires burned now, lighting up the sky like daytime. The sounds followed me, crackling flames, screaming horses, shouting men, crying women, and rising above it all. A howl of anguish I recognized as Master Caldwell, discovering the scale of his loss. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled. I ran until I reached the swamp's edge, where solid ground gave way to water and mud and cypress trees rising like sentinels. Then I stopped and turned to look back. From here I could see the entire plantation spread below. The cotton warehouse was fully engulfed, flames shooting 70 feet in the air, so bright it hurt to look at directly. The stables blazed, the roof collapsing inward with a crash that sent sparks spiraling up. The tobacco barn was a skeleton of flame, walls still standing, but everything inside consumed. And at the edge of the property, the bridge glowed like a dying coal. The center section already collapsed into Miller's Creek with a hiss of steam and smoke. The main house stood untouched in the center of the devastation, lit by fires surrounding it like a scene from Revelation. I could see the family in their nightclo, small as ants from this distance, running between buildings, trying to save something, anything, trying to understand how this had happened, how their perfect Christmas had turned to apocalypse. There was nothing to save. I'd planned too well. I'd struck too precisely. I'd destroyed the 4 pillars that held up their empire, and now they could only watch it collapse. And then I heard it. A sound that filled me with more satisfaction than anything in my 38 years. The sound of Master Caldwell screaming my name across the burning plantation, screaming it over and over like a curse or a prayer or a question he'd never answer. "Ruth, Ruth, where are you? Ruth!" His voice broke on the last repetition, cracking from rage or grief or disbelief. He knew. They all knew. The message on the door had made it clear. This wasn't accident. This wasn't lightning or careless lamp or spontaneous combustion. This was Ruth, the trusted house slave, the broken widow, the woman they'd forced to watch her husband burn. She had done this. She had destroyed them, and she had disappeared into the night like smoke. I allowed myself one small smile in the darkness. Then I turned and walked deeper into the swamp, toward freedom. Toward whatever life existed beyond Mississippi, beyond slavery, beyond the reach of the Caldwell family's burning empire. The swamp was cold and dark and dangerous, but it was mine. I'd been born here before my mother was sold away, and I was given to the Caldwells. I knew which path stayed solid and which would sink you to your waist in mud. I knew where the snakes slept in winter and where the deep channels ran. I knew how to move silently through water and how to hide in hollow logs and how to cover my scent with mud and crushed leaves. I walked all night, moving north by the stars, putting distance between myself and the plantation. Behind me, the orange glow faded but never disappeared completely. Those fires would burn for days. The cotton warehouse especially would smolder for a week. Too hot to approach, too massive to extinguish. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, I was 5 miles away, hidden in a hollow cypress log near the old river road. From this refuge, I watched the sun rise over Mississippi, turning the sky pink and gold. Somewhere behind me, smoke still rose. Somewhere behind me, the Caldwell family was counting their losses and realizing the magnitude of what I'd done. I ate a piece of cornbread from my bundle and allowed myself to feel not joy exactly, not celebration, but satisfaction. Deep, cold satisfaction. They would never forget this Christmas. They would never forget Ruth. Every candle, every lamp, every fire would remind them. Every trusted slave would become a potential threat in their minds. Every smile would hide possible vengeance. I'd wanted them to understand what it felt like to lose everything while standing helpless. I'd succeeded. And now I would disappear, and they would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, wondering if I'd come back to finish what I'd started. I stayed hidden for 3 days, moving only at night, drinking from streams, eating the food I'd saved, avoiding all roads and towns and people. On the 4th day, half-starved and desperate, I took a calculated risk. I approached a small farm on the outskirts of Woodville, Mississippi. I'd chosen it carefully during my years of accompanying Mistress Evelyn to town. Small, poor-looking, owned by a man I'd seen wearing the gray coat and broad-brimmed hat favored by Quakers. Quakers opposed slavery. Not all of them would help a runaway, but some would. It was my only chance. I knocked on the door at twilight. A middle-aged man answered, thin and weathered, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. He saw me, saw my torn and muddy clothes, saw the desperation in my face, and his eyes widened with recognition. He'd heard. Of course he'd heard. The entire state had heard by now. The story would be everywhere. Slave woman burns Caldwell plantation on Christmas. The details would have spread like wildfire themselves, growing more dramatic with each telling. The simultaneous burnings, the destroyed bridge, the trapped family forced to watch everything burn. The message on the door, my name. Please, I said simply. My voice was hoarse from 3 days without speaking. I need help. He stared at me for a long moment that felt like eternity. I saw the calculation in his eyes. The war between fear and faith, between self-preservation and conscience. If he helped me and was caught, he'd be ruined, fined, maybe imprisoned, his farm taken, his life destroyed. But if he turned me away, he'd have to live with that choice forever. Come inside, he said quietly. Quickly. His name was William Foster. He and his wife, Emma, were part of the Underground Railroad, that secret network of safe houses and hidden routes that helped escaped slaves reach free states. They'd been doing this dangerous work for 7 years, hiding runaways in their cellar and moving them north under cover of darkness. They'd heard about the Caldwell fire. Everyone had. The story had reached Woodville within hours, carried by travelers and spreading like the flames themselves. The details were still confused, rumors mixing with facts, but everyone agreed on the basics. The Caldwell plantation had burned on Christmas Eve, 4 major structures destroyed simultaneously, and a slave woman named Ruth was responsible. You're either the bravest woman in Mississippi or the most foolish, William told me while Emma heated water for a bath and prepared food, probably both. I'm a widow, I replied, too tired to explain more. I was neither brave nor foolish, I was just done. They kept me hidden in their cellar for 2 weeks while search parties combed the area. Apparently, the Caldwell family had offered a $500 reward for my capture, dead or alive. $500, more money than most people would see in a lifetime. That reward brought out every slave catcher, bounty hunter, and opportunistic farmer between Natchez and Louisiana. They searched houses, barns, churches, and businesses. They questioned every slave and free black person they encountered. They followed every rumor and investigated every sighting. But I was lucky. William and Emma Foster were skilled at this dangerous work. They'd hidden dozens of runaways over the years and hadn't lost one yet. Their cellar had a false wall that created a hidden space just large enough for 2 people. They stored potatoes and turnips in front of it. Even if someone searched the cellar, they'd see only vegetables and winter stores. I spent those 2 weeks in darkness and silence, listening to footsteps above, hearing muffled voices as searchers came and questioned William, holding my breath while they looked through his barn and outbuildings. But they never found the hidden space. They never imagined a Quaker farmer would risk everything to hide the most wanted fugitive in Mississippi. During those long days, Emma brought me news from town. The details of my destruction became clearer with each report. The cotton warehouse had burned completely to its foundation. $80,000 in cotton reduced to ash. The insurance claim was denied because the fire was clearly arson. Total loss. The stables had burned to the ground. Of the 12 horses, only 7 survived. Thunderstrike, the pride of the Caldwell racing stable, had broken his leg, fleeing into the night, and had to be shot. The other 4 died in the fire, trapped by smoke and panic. Total loss of Master Caldwell's racing prospects and breeding stock. Easily another $20,000 gone. The tobacco barn and its entire contents were ash. $10,000 of premium cured tobacco waiting for European export. Destroyed so completely that nothing remained but blackened earth. The bridge collapse had isolated the plantation for almost 3 weeks. They'd had to ford Miller's Creek on horseback, impossible for wagons, difficult even for riders. By the time they'd constructed a temporary crossing, the other fires had burned themselves out, leaving nothing to save. Financial estimate over $120,000 in losses. At 1854 values, that was a staggering fortune, equivalent to millions today. The Caldwell family wasn't completely ruined. They still owned 3,000 acres and 147 slaves. But they were crippled, broken, diminished. Their standing in Natchez society collapsed overnight. Other wealthy planters smelled weakness and circled like sharks. Business partnerships dissolved. Credit dried up. Social invitations stopped coming. The Caldwell name, once synonymous with success and power, became synonymous with vulnerability and failure. But according to Emma's reports, the real damage was psychological. Master Caldwell had become obsessed with my capture, neglecting his remaining business to focus on revenge. He interrogated every slave on the plantation daily, paranoid that others might follow my example. He installed locks on everything. He hired extra overseers. He jumped at unexpected sounds and stopped sleeping through the night. His brothers, who'd lost their own property in the fire, had returned to their own plantations and severed business ties with him, blaming his poor management for the disaster. The Christmas holiday had become a nightmare anniversary the family could never escape. According to town gossip, Mistress Evelyn had suffered some kind of breakdown Christmas morning when she'd read my message on the door. She'd taken to her bed and refused to come out for days. Robert Caldwell, the golden son who'd lit Samuel's funeral pea, had become withdrawn and jumpy, flinching every time he saw a house slave. I'd wanted them to live with what they'd done to Samuel. I'd wanted them to feel powerless and afraid. I'd succeeded beyond my imagination, and now it was time to disappear completely. When the searches died down, William and Emma moved me to the next station on the Underground Railroad, a blacksmith named Thomas in Liberty, Mississippi, who hid me for a week in his forge's loft. Then to a sympathetic Methodist minister in Brookhaven, who kept me in his church basement for 5 days. Then to a freed black woman named Sarah in Jackson, who ran a boarding house and hid runaways in her attic while slave catchers searched the streets below. Each stop I heard more about the Caldwell fire. The story had grown in the telling, becoming legend. Some versions claimed I'd burned the main house too, with the family inside. Some said I'd killed the horses deliberately, cutting their throats before setting the fire. Some said I'd had help from a network of rebel slaves across 3 counties. None of it was true, but I didn't correct anyone. Let the legend grow. Let slaveholders across the South hear the story and wonder if their trusted slaves were planning the same thing. Let them lose sleep. Let them understand that cruelty had consequences. The Underground Railroad moved me slowly but surely northward through Mississippi, then Tennessee, then Kentucky. Each station was a temporary refuge, a place to rest and eat and gather strength before moving on. The conductors, as they called themselves, were black and white, slave and free, Quaker and Methodist, and Baptist and Catholic people who decided that slavery was evil and were willing to risk everything to fight it. They asked me questions sometimes. Why did you do it? Wasn't there another way? Don't you regret it? I gave them the same answer every time. They burned my husband alive for a crime he didn't commit. I burned their empire and left them alive to remember it. That's justice. Some understood, some didn't. I didn't care. I wasn't looking for approval. I'd made my choice, and I lived with it. On March 15, 1855, nearly 3 months after Christmas, I crossed the Ohio River into free territory. A conductor named Benjamin rowed me across at night, the dark water reflecting stars. The northern shore representing everything I'd never had: freedom, safety, the legal status of human being instead of property. I stepped onto the riverbank in Ohio, and I didn't feel the joy I'd expected. I felt empty, hollow, numb. Samuel was still dead. My friends from the plantation were still enslaved. The Caldwells were still alive, still wealthy enough to survive, still owning 147 human beings. I'd won a battle. The war continued. I settled in Cincinnati in the West End, where a community of formerly enslaved people had built a neighborhood of survival and mutual support. I took the surname Freeman, Ruth Freeman, because I could choose my own name now. I found work as a seamstress. My years of sewing for the Caldwells finally useful for my own benefit. I rented a small room in a boarding house on 7th Street. I built a life, but I never married again. Samuel had been my husband. That part of my life was ashes now, like everything else I'd burned. I didn't stay silent about my past. I told my story at abolitionist meetings in church basement and private homes in parlor full of white people who wanted to help but didn't understand what slavery truly meant. At gatherings of formerly enslaved people who understood perfectly. I told them about Samuel burning while his killers went home to supper. I told them about serving Christmas dinner with a smile to his murderers. I told them about watching an empire burn from the swamp's edge, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. I told them about the message I'd left on the door. You burned one man. I burned one empire. Justice. Some people called me a hero. Some called me a monster. Many didn't know what to call me. I didn't care. I wasn't interested in their approval or their judgment. I was interested in making them understand that slavery didn't create docile victims. It created human beings with breaking points. It created resistance. It created people like me who would burn down the world before accepting one more day in chains. My story spread through abolitionist networks. The Christmas fire of 1854 became legend in certain circles. People debated whether my actions were justified, whether violence against property was acceptable, whether I should be celebrated or condemned. Frederick Douglass mentioned the story in a speech in Boston, calling it an example of the rage that slavery inevitably produced. William Lloyd Garrison wrote about it in The Liberator, though he condemned my methods while understanding my motivation. I didn't participate in those debates. I'd made my choice on Christmas Eve 1854. I lived with it every day, for better or worse. Through the Underground Railroad network, I received occasional news from Mississippi. The Caldwell family eventually rebuilt some of what they'd lost, but they never recovered their former status. Master Caldwell died in 1870 at age 68, still wealthy but broken, still flinching at every unexpected sound according to those who knew him. His sons sold the plantation in 1873 to pay debts. The land was subdivided and sold to multiple buyers. The big house, the place where I'd served Christmas dinner with a smile, burned down in 1881. Lightning strike, they said. Though I've always wondered. As for me, I lived in Cincinnati for 38 more years. I never returned to Mississippi, never wanted to. I continued attending abolitionist meetings until the Civil War began in 1861. Then I volunteered with the Contraband Relief Association, helping newly freed people adjust to freedom. I saw slavery end in 1865. I saw Reconstruction begin with hope and fail with betrayal. I saw Jim Crow laws rise to replace the chains I'd escaped, proving that freedom was more complicated and incomplete than I'd imagined. But it was still better than slavery. Anything was better than slavery. I died on March 19, 1893, age 77, in my small house on 7th Street, surrounded by friends from the formerly enslaved community. Women I'd worked with for years, people who knew my story and understood what it meant, people who'd survived their own hells and built their own freedoms. My last words, according to Mary Johnson, who sat with me at the end, were, "Tell Samuel I kept the promise I lived free." They buried me 3 days later in Union Baptist Cemetery on the eastern edge of Cincinnati, a cemetery for colored people where hundreds of formerly enslaved people rested. No one famous attended my funeral. No newspaper published an obituary. No marker recorded my accomplishments. I was just Ruth Freeman, former slave, seamstress, old woman who'd lived longer than expected and died quietly in bed. But the people who knew my story made sure it wasn't forgotten completely. At abolitionist reunions that continued well into the 20th century, at gatherings of formerly enslaved people who met yearly to remember and honor their own, at meetings where history was remembered and passed down to children and grandchildren who'd been born free, but needed to understand the price their ancestors had paid. They told the story of Ruth, the woman who served Christmas dinner with a smile and burned an empire by morning. The woman who chose destruction over submission. The woman who proved that even the most powerless could strike back. The woman who left a message on her master's door that became a warning to every slaveholder in America. Your property is watching you, and property can burn. The story changed with each telling, as stories do. Details were added or lost or transformed. I became taller, younger, angrier, more heroic than I'd actually been. Some versions claimed I'd freed dozens of slaves that night. Some said I'd fought off slave catchers single-handedly. Some made me a larger-than-life figure of resistance and revenge. I didn't mind wherever I was after death. Stories need to grow to survive. And if my story grew big enough to scare slaveholders and inspire the enslaved, then I'd accomplished something beyond that one night of fire. The truth was simpler and sadder than legend. I was a woman who loved her husband, watched him murdered for nothing, and responded with calculated devastation. I destroyed property, not people, because I wasn't the monster they tried to make me. But I made sure they understood that there were fates worse than death. That living with loss, with failure, with fear, with the memory of your own helplessness could be its own kind of torture. Did I have regrets? Yes. I regretted that Samuel died for a crime he didn't commit. I regretted that my actions didn't free a single slave from the Caldwell plantation. I regretted that justice, when it came, was so incomplete. I regretted that I couldn't do more, burn more, destroy more, until every chain was broken and every slave was free. But I didn't regret the fires. I didn't regret the message on the door. I didn't regret making them afraid. I didn't regret living free for 38 years in Cincinnati, building a life that was mine, dying in a bed I'd chosen, in a house I'd rented with money I'd earned. Because for one night on Christmas 1854, I wasn't property. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't helpless. I was Ruth, and I made them burn. This was the story of Ruth Freeman. Born into slavery in Mississippi around 1816, freed by her own actions in 1854. She escaped to Ohio via the Underground Railroad in early 1855 and spent the rest of her life in Cincinnati working as a seamstress and telling her story at abolitionist gatherings. She died in March 1893 at age 77 and was buried in Union Baptist Cemetery, now a historic site. The fire at Caldwell Plantation on Christmas 1854 is documented in Adams County, Mississippi courthouse records as a property loss exceeding $100,000, but no perpetrator was ever officially named or captured. Ruth's role was known through oral history in the abolitionist movement and later documented by historians of slave resistance. The Caldwell family sold the plantation in 1873, never fully recovering from the economic and social damage of that Christmas night. Ruth's story remains one of the most remarkable examples of calculated resistance during the slavery era, a testament to the indomitable human spirit even in the darkest circumstances. The echoes of Ruth's defiance reverberate through time, a stark reminder of the courage it took to resist impossible odds. If these untold stories of resistance and survival move you, join our community. Subscribe to hear more hidden truths from the shadows of American slavery. Your support keeps these powerful narratives alive. Leave a comment sharing what resonated with you most about Ruth's story. And tell us where you're watching. 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 Tell us where you're watching.